The sound that woke Quinn Everett from his restless sleep was so faint he almost thought he'd imagined it. A soft shuffling beneath the floorboards of his porch that made him reach for the rifle beside his bed before his eyes were fully open. He'd been living alone in the Montana Territory for 3 years now, just outside the growing town of Jefferson. And in that time, he'd learned that unexpected sounds in the night rarely brought good news. The moon hung full and bright over the eastern plains as Quinn stepped barefoot onto the wooden planks, his rifle held loose but ready. The air carried the sharp bite of early autumn, 1878, and he could see his breath ghosting in front of his face. For a moment he heard nothing but the distant howl of a coyote and the whisper of wind through the tall grass. Then it came again, that soft sound of movement, and this time he recognized it for what it was, breathing. Quinn crouched down and peered into the shadowed space beneath his porch. At first he saw nothing but darkness and the scattered tools he'd stored there. Then his eyes adjusted, and he made out the shape of a person curled tight against the foundation of his house, wrapped in what looked like a thin traveling cloak that had seen better days. "Come out of there," he said, keeping his voice level and firm. "I've got a rifle pointed at you, but I'd rather not use it at this hour." The figure stirred and a face emerged from the shadows, pale and dirt smudged in the moonlight. Even in the dim light he could see it was a woman, younger than he'd expected, with dark hair that fell in tangled waves around her shoulders. Her eyes were wide and wary, like a cornered animal weighing its chances. "I'm not armed," she said quietly. Her voice had an unexpected steadiness to it despite her obvious exhaustion. "And I'm not looking for trouble. I'll move on in the morning." Quinn lowered the rifle slightly, studying her. She couldn't have been more than 25, though the hardness around her eyes suggested she'd lived more than her years. Her dress was torn at the hem and covered in trail dust, and he could see she was shivering despite her attempts to control it. "How long have you been under there?" he asked. "Since sundown. I walked from Jefferson. I saw your light go out and figured you'd gone to bed. I just needed somewhere safe to sleep for a few hours. Jefferson's 6 miles back. I know how far it is. I walked every step of it." There was no self-pity in her tone, just a statement of fact. Quinn straightened up and propped his rifle against the porch rail. "Come on out of there. I've got a fire inside and coffee still warm on the stove." She hesitated, clearly weighing whether this was a trap. "I told you I'll move on in the morning. I don't need charity." "Didn't say you did." "But it's going to drop below freezing tonight, and that cloak won't keep you alive. You can sleep by the fire inside, or you can freeze to death under my porch. But I won't have a woman's death on my conscience, because I was too stubborn to offer basic hospitality." Something in his words seemed to reach her, because after a long moment she began to crawl out from under the porch. She moved stiffly, as if her muscles had locked up from the cold and the cramped space. When she finally stood, Quinn could see she was shorter than he'd thought, the top of her head barely reaching his shoulder. She swayed slightly on her feet and he reached out instinctively to steady her, but she stepped back quickly. "I can manage," she said. "Suit yourself." Quinn picked up his rifle and gestured toward the door. "After you." Inside, the cabin was still warm from the fire he'd banked before bed. It wasn't much, just a single room with a bed in one corner, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, and a stone fireplace that took up most of one wall. But it was sturdy and weatherproof, which was more than many could say in this part of the territory. Quinn stirred the fire back to life and added another log while the woman stood uncertainly near the door, as if ready to bolt at any moment. He poured her a cup of coffee from the pot on the stove and set it on the table. "Sit," he said. "Warm yourself up." She moved to the table slowly, her eyes never leaving him. When she wrapped her hands around the tin cup, he could see they were red and chapped, with cuts and scrapes across the knuckles. She drank the coffee quickly, barely seeming to notice that it was still hot enough to burn. "When did you last eat?" Quinn asked. She didn't answer right away, and he had his answer in her silence. He went to the shelf where he kept his supplies and cut several thick slices from a loaf of bread he'd bought in town 2 days ago. There was butter in the cool box and some cold bacon from his breakfast. He set it all in front of her and went to stir the fire again, giving her some privacy to eat without being watched. When he turned back around, the food was gone, and she was staring into her empty cup with an expression that might have been shame or might have been simple exhaustion. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I'll work to pay you back. I can cook and clean. I'm strong, despite how I might look right now. I'll work tomorrow and then I'll be on my way." "Where are you headed?" "West, California, maybe. Somewhere that's not here." Quinn pulled out the other chair and sat down across from her. "You running from something or to something?" Her eyes flashed with a spark of defiance. "That's my business." "Fair enough. But if you're running from the law, I should know about it now." "I'm not a criminal, if that's what you're asking." "Didn't think you were, but there's a difference between being chased by the law and being chased by something else." She studied him for a long moment, and he could see her making calculations behind those tired eyes. Finally, she seemed to come to some decision. "My name is Kate Emerson," she said. "I was married. My husband died 6 months ago. His brother decided I should marry him instead, take care of his house and his children since his wife passed the year before. I told him no. He didn't take it well. I left 3 days ago with what I could carry. He'll be looking for me." Quinn nodded slowly. It wasn't an uncommon story in these parts. Women had few options when men decided what their lives should look like. "What's his name?" "Thomas Garrett. He runs a cattle operation about 15 miles north of Jefferson. He's got connections with the sheriff there." That explained why she'd walked past Jefferson instead of stopping for help. In small towns, connections meant everything, and a man with cattle money could buy a lot of blind eyes. "My name's Quinn Everett," he said. "I've got a small ranch here, just me and about 50 head of cattle. I could use help if you're serious about working. Room and board plus fair wages. Stay as long as you need to figure out your next move." Kate looked at him with open suspicion. "Why would you do that? You don't know me." "No, I don't. But I know what it's like to need a fresh start. When I came here 3 years ago, I had nothing but a horse and a dream of building something that was mine. A stranger in town gave me work and never asked questions about where I'd come from. I figure I can pay that forward. What do you want in return?" The question was blunt, but Quinn understood the wariness behind it. A woman alone learned to question generosity. "I want help running this place. It's more than one person can manage well. I need someone who can cook better than I can, which wouldn't be hard. Someone who can tend the vegetable garden I keep meaning to plant, mend clothes, help with the chickens I've been thinking about getting. Basic ranch work. Nothing you can't walk away from if you choose to." Kate was quiet for a long moment. "I won't share your bed. I won't be used that way." "Good, because I'm not offering that. I'll sleep out in the barn while you're here. You can have the cabin to yourself at night." "That's not necessary." "Maybe not, but it'll help you sleep easier, and it'll keep the gossips in town from having too much to say if anyone finds out you're staying here." Kate's shoulders, which had been held rigid with tension since she'd emerged from under the porch, finally relaxed slightly. "All right. I'll stay for a while, but I'll earn my keep. I won't be beholden to anyone ever again. Wouldn't have it any other way." Quinn stood and pulled a thick blanket from the chest at the foot of his bed. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow I'll show you around the place and we'll figure out a routine that works." He headed toward the door, but Kate's voice stopped him. Quinn, he turned back, thank you, for not asking more questions, for not making me feel like I owe you something I'm not willing to give. Everyone deserves a chance to start over, he said simply. Sleep well, Kate. Outside, the barn was cold but the hay was thick, and Quinn had weathered worse. He made himself a rough bed in the loft and lay staring up at the wooden beams, wondering what exactly he'd gotten himself into. He'd been honest about needing help, but he'd also been alone long enough that the solitude had become comfortable. Having another person on the ranch, especially a woman with trouble following her, would change things. But when he thought about Kate's face, the weariness and the defiance mixed together, he knew he'd made the right choice. Whatever came next, at least she'd have a safe place to rest for a while. Morning came with the roosters Quinn didn't yet own, which meant it came with the harsh cry of a hawk hunting over the grasslands. He woke stiff from the cold and the hard bed of hay, but he'd slept well enough. When he entered the cabin, he found Kate already awake and the fire built up warm. She'd found the eggs he'd bought in town and made breakfast, simple but good. I wasn't sure if you'd actually gone to the barn, she said as he came in. Thought you might have been testing me. When I say something, I mean it. They ate in comfortable silence, and then Quinn took her on a tour of the property. It wasn't much yet, just 80 acres of grassland with good water from a creek that ran along the eastern boundary. The cattle were scattered across the range, hardy breeds that could survive the Montana winters. There was a small corral near the barn where he kept his 2 horses, a sturdy bay gelding named Chester and a younger mare named Daisy. The fence on the north side needs mending, Quinn explained as they walked. And I've been meaning to build a proper chicken coop before winter sets in hard. The garden plot over there has good soil, but I've never had time to work it properly. Kate listened carefully, asking practical questions about water sources and soil quality, and which neighbors he was on good terms with. She had a sharp mind and clearly knew ranch work, which made sense if she'd been married to a rancher. Over the next few weeks, they fell into a routine that felt surprisingly natural. Kate threw herself into the work with a determination that bordered on fierce. She mended the fence, started clearing the garden plot even though it was late in the season, and reorganized the cabin with an efficiency that made Quinn realize how haphazardly he'd been living. She was true to her word about earning her keep, often working until well past dark. Quinn found himself looking forward to meal times, when they'd sit together and talk about the day's work. Kate had a dry sense of humor that caught him off guard, and a way of seeing through pretense that he appreciated. She never asked about his past, and he returned the favor, though he found himself curious about the woman she'd been before circumstances had forced her to flee. He also found himself noticing things he probably shouldn't, like the way she hummed quietly while she worked, or how she'd sometimes stop in the middle of a task to watch the sunset, her face soft with something that looked like peace. She was beautiful in an understated way, all straight lines and practical grace, but it was her strength that drew him more than anything else. The first real test came on a Tuesday afternoon when Quinn rode into Jefferson for supplies. He'd asked Kate if she wanted to come, but she'd declined, saying she had too much work to finish. He understood she wasn't ready to risk being seen in town. He was loading flour and coffee into his saddlebags when a man's voice called out behind him, "You Quinn Everett." Quinn turned to find a large man with a weathered face and hard eyes standing in the street. He wore a rancher's clothes, good quality but dusty from riding, and carried himself with the confidence of someone used to getting his way. "I am, and you are, Thomas Garrett. I'm looking for a woman, my sister by marriage. Name's Kate Emerson. You seen her?" Quinn's face remained carefully neutral. "Can't say I have. What makes you think I'd know her?" She headed this direction when she ran off. You're about the only homestead out this way. Figured she might have come asking for help. Sorry, can't help you, I live alone. Thomas stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. You sure about that? Because I'd hate to find out you're lying to me. Kate's family. She's confused right now, not thinking straight. Her husband's death hit her hard. She needs family to take care of her. Like I said, I haven't seen her. Now if you'll excuse me, I've got supplies to get home. Quinn swung into his saddle, very aware of Thomas's eyes on him as he rode out of town. His jaw was tight with anger, not at the confrontation, but at the casual way Thomas had talked about Kate as if she were property that had wandered off. When he got back to the ranch, Kate was in the garden, her hands dark with soil. She looked up as he approached, and something in his face made her go still. He found you, she said. It wasn't a question. Thomas Garrett came asking in town if I'd seen you. I told him no. Kate stood up slowly, wiping her hands on her apron. He won't believe you. He'll come here to check. Let him come. This is my land and you're here of your own free will. He's got no legal claim on you. Legal doesn't matter out here and you know it. Thomas does what he wants and most people are too afraid to stand against him. Then I guess he's about to meet someone who isn't afraid. Kate's eyes searched his face. Why are you doing this? It would be easier to just tell him I'm here. He'd take me and you'd be rid of the trouble. Quinn stepped closer, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. Because it's not right. And because somewhere along the way you stopped being just someone passing through and started being someone I give a damn about. The words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning neither of them had quite been ready to acknowledge. Kate's expression softened and she reached out, her soil-stained hand touching his arm briefly before falling away. Thank you, she said quietly. No one stood up for me like this before. Then you've been around the wrong people. They prepared as best they could for Thomas's arrival. Quinn cleaned his rifle and checked the ammunition. Kate moved through the cabin with nervous energy, unable to settle. When the sound of horses came 2 days later, they were as ready as they could be. Thomas Garrett rode up with 3 other men, all armed. Quinn stepped out onto the porch, his rifle held casually but within easy reach. Kate stood in the doorway behind him. Well now, Thomas said, his voice carrying false cheer. Looks like you're a liar, Everett. I'm no such thing. When you asked if I'd seen Kate Emerson, I hadn't. She came to me after that conversation. Timing's important in these things. Thomas's face darkened. Kate, get your things. You're coming home. Kate stepped forward onto the porch, and Quinn felt a surge of pride at the way she held herself tall despite the obvious fear in her eyes. I'm not your family, Thomas. I was married to your brother. He's gone. That connection died with him. I don't owe you anything. That's not how it works, and you know it. You're still part of the family. My children need a mother. I need a wife. It's the natural order of things. The natural order is that I'm a free woman and I choose where I go and who I'm with. I choose to be here. One of Thomas's men shifted in his saddle, his hand moving toward his gun. Quinn raised the rifle slightly, the movement small but unmistakable. I wouldn't, he said quietly. This is my land. Kate's here of her own choice. You've got no legal right to take her anywhere. Legal right? Thomas laughed harshly. You think I need legal right? I've got 4 men here and you're alone. I'd think real careful about how this plays out if I were you. I'm thinking plenty careful. I'm thinking about how the sheriff, even one in your pocket, would have to do something if 4 armed men shot a man on his own property trying to protect a woman. I'm thinking about how that kind of thing tends to draw attention from the territorial authorities. I'm thinking about how your cattle operation would fare if you were facing murder charges. Thomas's horse shifted restlessly, picking up on its rider's tension. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Thomas's eyes shifted to Kate. "This is what you want. Living out here with a stranger doing rough work. You had comfort with me, a real house, respect in town. I had a cage," Kate said. "Here I have freedom. That's worth more than all the comfort in the world." Thomas's jaw worked as if he were chewing over words too bitter to swallow. Finally, he yanked his horse's head around. "This isn't over," he said to Quinn. "You'll regret making an enemy of me. I'll regret it less than I'd regret betraying someone's trust." Thomas and his men rode off, their horses kicking up dust that hung in the still air. Quinn didn't lower the rifle until they were completely out of sight. When he finally did, he found his hands were shaking slightly with the adrenaline rush. Kate sat down hard on the porch steps, her own hands trembling. "He'll come back. Maybe. But next time we'll be ready for that too." She looked up at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "You really would have shot them if they'd tried to take me?" "Yes." "Why, you barely know me." Quinn set the rifle aside and sat down next to her. "I know enough. I know you're brave and hardworking. I know you laugh at my terrible jokes about the cattle, even though they're not funny. I know you sing while you're working, and you always save the last piece of cornbread for me, even though I know it's your favorite. I know that having you here has made this place feel less like a house and more like a home." Kate turned to face him fully. "Quinn, I can't give you promises right now. I'm still figuring out who I am without someone telling me. I'm still scared every time I hear horses that it's Thomas coming back. I'm broken in ways I'm not sure can be fixed. I'm not asking for promises. I'm just saying I'm glad you're here, however long that is, whatever that looks like." She reached out and took his hand, her fingers threading through his. They sat like that for a long time, watching the sun track across the sky, neither of them needing to fill the silence with words. The weeks that followed were tense. Quinn kept watch more carefully, and he made sure Kate knew how to shoot the rifle if she needed to. But Thomas didn't return, and slowly the sharp edge of fear began to dull into simple caution. Autumn deepened into the hard cold of early winter. The cottonwoods along the creek turned gold and then bare. Quinn and Kate worked together to prepare the ranch for the coming snow, bringing the cattle closer to the barn, stocking up on supplies, and sealing the gaps in the cabin walls against the wind. Somewhere in the midst of all that work, something shifted between them. Quinn wasn't sure exactly when it happened. Maybe it was the evening Kate's hands were too cold to work properly, and he'd warmed them between his own, both of them standing close in the barn with their breath fogging in the lamplight. Maybe it was the morning he'd come in from checking the herd to find her making his favorite breakfast, her face bright with pleasure at his surprised smile. Or maybe it had been happening all along, so gradually that they hadn't noticed until they were already in the middle of it. One night in late November, Quinn came into the cabin to find Kate standing by the window, looking out at the first real snow of the season. The flakes were fat and slow, accumulating on the ground in a blanket of white that glowed in the moonlight. "I love this time of year," she said softly. "Everything goes quiet. The whole world feels like it's holding its breath." Quinn moved to stand beside her. "In the morning, everything will be transformed, the same land but completely different." She turned to look at him, and he could see something in her eyes that made his heart beat faster. "Quinn, can I ask you something? Anything? Why haven't you ever married, built a family out here?" He considered the question carefully. "I suppose I was waiting to find someone who fit. Someone who could love this land the way I do, who wasn't scared off by the hard work and the isolation. Someone who saw it as an adventure instead of a burden. And did you find that person?" "I think so. I think she's been living under my roof for the past 2 months, turning my rough camp into a real home." Kate's breath caught slightly. "Quinn, I'm still scared." Scared of what I feel, scared of losing control again, scared of what might happen if Thomas comes back. Fear's natural, but you can't let it run your life. Sometimes you have to take a chance on something good even when you're scared. She reached up and touched his face, her hand soft against his beard-roughened cheek. "You're a good man, Quinn Everett, the best I've ever known." He covered her hand with his own. "Kate, I'm going to kiss you now if that's all right." "That's more than all right." When their lips met, it felt like coming home after a long journey. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, two people learning each other. Then Kate's arms went around his neck, and Quinn pulled her closer, and the kiss deepened into something that spoke of loneliness ending and new beginnings, and the kind of love that builds slowly but lasts. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Kate rested her forehead against his chest. "I can't believe I found you by accident," she said. "I can't believe I almost kept walking past your ranch that night. No such thing as accidents. Some things are just meant to be." They stood holding each other as the snow fell outside, and Quinn felt a peace settle over him that he'd never known before. This was what he'd been building toward all along, he realized. Not just a ranch, but a life. Not just surviving, but truly living. That night, Kate didn't make him go out to the barn. They lay together in the narrow bed, fully clothed, simply holding each other. It was intimate in a way that had nothing to do with physical desire and everything to do with trust and comfort. Quinn fell asleep with Kate's head on his shoulder and her breathing soft against his neck, and he couldn't remember ever feeling so content. Winter closed in hard after that, as Montana winters did. There were days they couldn't go outside for more than a few minutes at a time, when the wind howled like a living thing, and the snow piled up past the windows. But the cabin was warm and well-stocked, and Quinn found he didn't mind being snowed in when it meant long evenings by the fire with Kate. They talked for hours about everything and nothing. Kate told him about her childhood in Nebraska, the daughter of a farmer who'd worked himself to death trying to make poor land produce. She told him about her first husband, a kind man but quiet, who'd never really seen her as anything more than a helpmate. She told him about the suffocating grief after his death, and how Thomas had swooped in before the earth had even settled on the grave, presenting marriage as a duty rather than a choice. Quinn told her about his own past, about growing up in St. Louis as the youngest son of a family with too many children and not enough money. He told her about heading west at 18 with nothing but ambition and stubbornness, about the years he'd spent working other men's ranches and saving every penny. He told her about the day he'd bought this land, how he'd stood on this spot and seen his future spread out before him like a promise. "I never knew what was missing until you showed up," he said one night as they sat together on the bed, Kate mending a shirt and Quinn oiling the leather of his saddle. "I thought I had everything I needed. Turns out I was wrong." Kate set down her sewing and looked at him with an expression so tender it made his chest ache. "I spent so long thinking I didn't deserve happiness, that wanting more than basic survival was selfish. You've shown me that's not true. You deserve everything good this world has to offer." "Then I want you. I want this life we're building. I want to wake up every morning and know I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Quinn set aside the saddle and pulled her close. "I want that too. I want it so much it scares me sometimes." "Then let's stop being scared. Let's just be happy." They made love for the first time that night, and it was everything first times should be. Gentle and awkward and perfect in its imperfection. Afterward, Kate cried, but she assured him through her tears that they were good tears, healing tears, tears for the woman she'd been and the woman she was becoming. When spring finally broke through winter's grip, they rode into Jefferson together. It was time to stop hiding, time to face the world as what they were, a couple building a life together. Quinn held his head high as they walked down the main street, Kate's hand tucked in the crook of his arm. They went to the general store first, stocking up on supplies. The owner, a friendly man named George, congratulated them on making it through their first winter together. His wife, Martha, was more direct. "About time Jefferson got another decent woman," she said, looking Kate up and down with approval. "We need more people like you willing to stick out the hard times." At the land office, Quinn filed the papers to add Kate's name to his property deed. The clerk looked surprised but processed the paperwork without comment. When Quinn paid the fee, Kate protested, but he squeezed her hand. "It's your home too. Should be in your name as much as mine." They were leaving the land office when Thomas Garrett appeared, blocking their path. He looked worse than the last time Quinn had seen him, thinner and harder with dark circles under his eyes. "Kate," he said, his voice rough. "I need to talk to you." Kate's hand tightened on Quinn's arm, but her voice was steady. "There's nothing to say, Thomas. Please, just 5 minutes, that's all I'm asking." Quinn looked at Kate, letting her make the choice. She nodded slightly. 5 minutes. Quinn stays with me." They moved to the side of the street, away from the foot traffic. Thomas twisted his hat in his hands, looking more pathetic than threatening. "I came to apologize," he said. "I was wrong. Everything I did was wrong. You were right to run." Kate's eyes widened in surprise. "What brought this on?" "My daughter. She asked me why you left, and I tried to explain that you needed to come back to take care of them. She looked at me with these big, sad eyes and said if you needed to leave so bad, then making you come back would just make you sad forever." Thomas's voice cracked. "She's 8 years old and she understood something I couldn't. That you're a person with your own wants, not just a solution to my problems. Thomas, I'm sorry about your children, but I couldn't be what you needed me to be. I know. I see that now. I hired a proper nanny, someone who actually wants to care for kids. The children are doing better. I'm doing better. I just needed to tell you that I'm sorry and that I won't bother you anymore." He held out his hand to Quinn. After a moment, Quinn shook it. "Take care of her," Thomas said. "She deserves someone who will." "I intend to." They watched Thomas walk away, his shoulders hunched. Kate let out a long breath. "I never thought I'd hear him apologize. People can change. Sometimes it just takes a hard lesson to make it happen." The rest of the day in Jefferson passed pleasantly. They had lunch at the small restaurant, visited with Martha about the possibility of Kate joining the church ladies' auxiliary, and stopped by the blacksmith to order materials for expanding the barn. By the time they rode home in the late afternoon, it felt like they'd finally planted roots that would hold. That spring and summer, they worked the ranch together like true partners. Quinn had been right about Kate having a gift for the garden. She coaxed vegetables from the soil with a patience he didn't possess, and by July, they had more produce than they could eat themselves. Kate started selling the surplus in town, building relationships with other families, and becoming part of the community in her own right. They bought chickens and Kate trained them to come to her call, laughing at their antics as they scattered across the yard. The cattle herd grew as Quinn bought more head with the money from selling their beef. The ranch was prospering in ways it never had when Quinn was alone. But more than the material success, there was the joy of shared work and shared dreams. Quinn loved watching Kate's face light up when she talked about her plans for the ranch. He loved the way she'd seek him out in the middle of the day just to steal a kiss or share a funny story. He loved falling asleep with her every night and waking up with her every morning, her dark hair spread across the pillow, and her face soft with sleep. On a warm evening in August, Quinn took Kate for a ride up to the highest point on their property. From there, you could see for miles. The ranch spread out below, the creek winding like a silver ribbon, The town of Jefferson in the distance, and beyond it all, the mountains rising purple against the sky. "This is my favorite view in the world," Quinn said as they sat on their horses side by side. "It's beautiful," Kate agreed. "I never get tired of looking at it." Quinn reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. He'd ridden to Virginia City 3 weeks ago and spent nearly all his savings on what was inside. His hands were actually shaking as he opened it to reveal a simple gold band with a small diamond. "Kate Emerson, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Legally, officially, in front of God and everyone, Kate's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes bright with tears. "Quinn, yes. Yes, 1,000 times yes." He slipped off his horse and helped her down from hers, then went down on one knee properly to slide the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, which felt like another sign that this was exactly right. Kate pulled him to his feet and kissed him with all the passion and love she possessed. When they finally broke apart, she was laughing and crying at the same time. "I can't believe this is my life," she said. "A year ago I was sleeping under your porch thinking I'd move on in the morning. Now I'm standing here wearing your ring and calling this land home. Best decision I ever made was inviting you inside that night. Best decision I ever made was saying yes." They were married 4 weeks later in the small church in Jefferson. Martha organized the whole thing with military efficiency, marshaling the other women in town to create a celebration worthy of the occasion. Kate wore a dress of pale blue silk that Martha had helped her sew, and Quinn wore a new suit that made him feel awkward but was worth it for the way Kate smiled when she saw him. The church was packed with neighbors and friends, people who'd come to respect Quinn's hard work and Kate's warm heart. Even Thomas Garrett came, standing in the back with his children. When he caught Kate's eye, he nodded once, a gesture of genuine goodwill, and Kate smiled back. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Quinn kissed Kate with a tenderness that made more than one woman in the congregation wipe away tears. They walked back down the aisle hand in hand to the sound of applause and well wishes. The reception was held in the town square, with tables of food and a makeshift dance floor. Quinn, who'd never been much for dancing, found himself swept into it anyway, Kate laughing as he tried to remember the steps. They danced until the stars came out, surrounded by their community and their friends, and Quinn thought he'd never been happier. Late in the evening, as they were preparing to ride home, Martha pulled Kate aside. "You've got good color in your cheeks and you're glowing," Martha said with a knowing smile. "You expecting yet?" Kate blushed. "I think I might be. Too early to be sure, but yes, I think so." Martha hugged her tight. "That's wonderful news. You're going to be a fine mother." On the ride home, Kate told Quinn what Martha had said. He nearly fell off his horse in surprise and joy. "A baby, are you sure? Not completely, but the signs are there. Are you happy?" Quinn pulled his horse alongside hers and reached over to take her hand. Happy doesn't begin to cover it. Terrified, excited, grateful, all of it at once. We're going to be parents. Best parents we can be. Our children will grow up knowing they're loved and wanted, that they have choices, that this land is theirs if they want it, but they're free to choose their own paths too. Kate squeezed his hand. "I love you, Quinn Everett." "I love you too, Kate Everett." The name still sounded new and wonderful, a marker of the life they were building together. Their first child, a son, was born the following spring on a morning when the meadowlarks were singing and the wildflowers were blooming across the range. The labor was long and difficult, with Martha and the doctor from Jefferson in attendance. Quinn wore a path in the ground outside the cabin, pacing and praying and trying not to imagine all the things that could go wrong. When he finally heard the baby's cry, he nearly collapsed with relief. Martha opened the door with a broad smile. "You have a son," she said, "and Kate's doing fine. Come meet your boy." Quinn walked into the cabin on shaking legs. Kate lay in the bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a blanket. When she looked up at Quinn, her smile was incandescent. "Come meet our son," she said softly. Quinn approached carefully, as if the moment were made of glass and might shatter if he moved too fast. Kate pulled back the blanket to reveal a tiny red face, eyes squeezed shut and mouth open in a wail of protest at this strange new world. "He's perfect," Quinn breathed. "Absolutely perfect." "What should we name him?" They'd discussed names for months but never quite settled on one. Now, looking at his son, Quinn knew. "Samuel," he said. "After my grandfather, he was the best man I ever knew, strong and kind and honest. I'd like our son to carry his name." "Samuel Everett," Kate said, testing it out. "I like it." "Hello, Samuel. Welcome home." The baby quieted at his mother's voice, and Quinn felt his heart expand with a love so fierce it was almost painful. This was his family, his wife, his son, his land. Everything he'd worked for, everything he'd dreamed of, right here in this moment. The years that followed were full in the best possible way. Samuel grew into a sturdy, curious boy with his mother's dark hair and his father's gray eyes. He toddled after Quinn around the ranch as soon as he could walk, and Kate taught him his letters as soon as he could sit still long enough to learn them. 2 years after Samuel came a daughter, Lily, who had Kate's sharp mind and Quinn's stubborn determination. She was fearless in a way that terrified and delighted her parents in equal measure, climbing trees and chasing cattle, and declaring she was going to be a rancher like her father. The ranch prospered. Quinn expanded their herd and bought another 40 acres when the neighboring land came up for sale. Kate's garden became famous in Jefferson, and she started teaching other women her techniques. They built a proper house, bigger than the cabin, with separate bedrooms for the children and a wide porch where they'd sit in the evenings and watch the sun set over their land. They had hard times, too. A winter when they lost half the herd to disease. A summer drought that nearly broke them. Months when money was so tight they weren't sure they'd make it through. But they faced everything together, and somehow that made even the hardest times bearable. On their 10th anniversary, Quinn and Kate rode up to the high point on their property again, leaving the children with Martha for the evening. The view had changed some. Their house was visible now, smoke rising from the chimney, and the barn had been expanded twice. But the essential beauty of the land remained the same. "You ever regret it?" Quinn asked. "Staying here instead of going on to California like you'd planned?" Kate looked at him with surprise. "Regret it? Quinn, this is the best life I could have imagined. Better than anything I was running toward. You gave me everything: love, partnership, freedom, family. How could I regret that? I just want to make sure you're happy, that you don't feel trapped. I've never felt freer. This isn't a cage, it's a home I chose. There's a world of difference." Quinn pulled her close, kissing her with all the love he'd felt for her since that first night when he'd found her under his porch. "I'm the luckiest man alive," he said against her lips. "We're both lucky. We found each other when we needed it most." They sat together as the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Two people who'd started as strangers and become everything to each other. More years passed, good years filled with the kind of happiness that comes from honest work and honest love. Samuel grew tall and strong, deciding he wanted to study law in Helena, wanting to use his mind to help people the way his parents had helped each other. Quinn and Kate supported his choice completely, proud beyond words. Lily, as expected, stayed on the ranch. She had her father's gift with animals and her mother's head for business. By the time she was 16, she was essentially running half the operation, and doing it well. A third child surprised them when Kate was 40, another son they named after Quinn's father. Little Joseph was the delight of his older siblings and the joy of his parents' later years. When Quinn was 55, a young couple came through Jefferson looking for work. They'd traveled from Texas, fleeing drought and looking for a fresh start. Something about their story reminded Quinn of Kate all those years ago, and he hired them on the spot, helping them get established on a small plot of land that adjoined his property. "You always were a soft touch for people needing help," Kate teased him that evening. "Learned it from the best. You taught me that sometimes all someone needs is a chance and a safe place to rest." Kate leaned her head on his shoulder as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. Their sunset over their land, with their family safe inside the house they'd built together. "You remember that first night?" Kate asked softly. "When you found me under the porch, every detail. You were so fierce and proud, even when you were half frozen and starving. I was so scared, but I was even more scared of giving up my freedom. I thought you'd want something from me I wasn't willing to give. All I wanted was to help. The love came later when I wasn't expecting it." Kate turned to face him. "The best things always do. I told you I'd move on in the morning, but I'm so glad I stayed. I'm glad too, more than I can ever say." Quinn wrapped his arm around his wife, pulling her close as the stars began to appear overhead. Behind them, he could hear the sounds of home. Lily calling Joseph in for supper, the cattle lowing in the near pasture, the creak of the house settling. This was everything he'd wanted without knowing he wanted it. This was the dream he'd been building toward since the day he'd first set foot on this land. Not just a successful ranch, but a family. Not just a house, but a home. Not just a partner, but a soulmate who'd taken his simple, solitary life and transformed it into something rich and full and beautiful. Kate had been running from one life when she'd found shelter under his porch. Instead, she'd found the beginning of something neither of them had known they were looking for. They'd found each other, and in finding each other, they'd found themselves. As the evening deepened into night, Quinn thought about how fragile that moment had been, how easily Kate could have kept walking, could have chosen a different place to rest, could have moved on in the morning as she'd promised. But she'd stayed, and that choice had changed both their lives forever. The Montana sky stretched vast above them, studded with stars like diamonds scattered across black velvet. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, and closer by, one of the horses nickered softly in the barn. The wind carried the scent of sage and grass and the promise of another good day to come. Quinn kissed the top of Kate's head, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. "I love you," he said, the words as true now as the first time he'd spoken them. "I love you too," Kate replied, her voice warm with contentment. "Today, tomorrow, and all the days after that." Inside the house, Lily laughed at something Joseph said, the sound bright and clear. It was the sound of happiness, of a family secure in their love for each other and their place in the world. It was the sound of dreams fulfilled and promises kept. This was home. This was family. This was love built on trust and respect, and the simple act of offering shelter to someone who needed it. This was everything that mattered, everything that would last long after they were gone. The land they'd worked, the children they'd raised, the love they'd nurtured through good times and bad. Quinn had thought he'd been complete before Kate arrived. He'd thought his life was full and his dreams achieved. But he'd been wrong. He'd been a house waiting for someone to make it a home, a man waiting for someone to teach him what love really meant. Kate had been that someone. The woman who'd slept under his porch and promised to move on in the morning had stayed forever instead, and in staying, had given him the greatest gift of his life. The gift of true partnership, true love, true home. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, marking the passage of time in the slow, steady way of the universe. But here on this porch, in this moment, time seemed to stand still. It was perfect, complete, whole. Quinn and Kate sat together in comfortable silence, watching their world settle into sleep, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges and new joys, but that they would face them together, as they always had. And that, Quinn thought as he held his wife close under the vast Montana sky, was all any person could really ask for: someone to love, someone to build a life with, and the freedom to choose that life every single day. Kate had given him all of that and more. She'd given him everything. The night deepened, and eventually they rose, heading inside to their warm bed and their sleeping children and their life together. Quinn took one last look at the land stretching out in the moonlight, his land, their land, and felt a wave of gratitude so strong it almost brought him to his knees. He'd found a woman sleeping under his porch one cold autumn night. She'd said she'd move on in the morning. Instead, she'd stayed forever, and in that staying had transformed both their lives into something neither could have imagined alone. It was, Quinn thought as he followed Kate inside and closed the door behind them, the best bargain he'd ever made, the best decision he'd ever stumbled into, the best gift life had ever given him. And as he lay down beside Kate that night, their hands finding each other in the darkness the way they always did, Quinn Everett fell asleep counting not his blessings but his gratitudes. For the chance meeting that wasn't really chance at all, for the courage it took to offer help to a stranger, for Kate's courage in accepting that help and staying when staying seemed impossible, and for every day since that had built upon that foundation. Outside, the wind whispered through the grass, and the cattle settled down for the night, and the stars continued their eternal watch over the earth. Inside, a family slept secure in their love for each other, their trust in each other, and their certainty that tomorrow would be just as good as today because they would face it together. That was what mattered. That was what lasted. That was what made all the struggle and hardship and fear worthwhile. Love, freely given and gratefully received. Partnership built on respect. Home made from choice rather than obligation. These were the things that endured, the things that mattered, the things that transformed a simple Montana ranch into something magical. A place where two broken people had found each other, and in finding each other, had become whole.